Welcome back to Fox 5 on the Hill Live this Sunday morning. President Biden and Congress averted the nation's first ever government default. Both sides made compromises to get that deal passed. And for more on the deal and the impact, we want to bring in Virginia Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger back to this program. Congresswoman, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I want to give people a sense of maybe what they haven't heard about what's in this deal, because, Republicans have said there are going to be cuts. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about what those cuts are. So can you give a sense to folks exactly what's going to be pulled back here as we move forward?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, it's important to remember that a default would have been absolutely catastrophic. And what we saw a couple months back was my counterparts on the other side of the aisle passed a bill that would have been 22% cuts across the board of non-discretionary spending. And that would have impacted everything from veterans benefits to spending on social and important programs to investments in roads, bridges, infrastructure across the board. And so what ultimately was done with the legislation that we just passed last week that was signed into law is we set forth spending caps. So recognizing that this next year, as we're going through the appropriations process, we will be allocating dollars at the same level that we did the prior year. And so some of the details of how that will work, we will be determining throughout the appropriations process, which is currently ongoing. So right now, as we are in the process of appropriating dollars and ultimately we'll vote on those bills to fund the government, the limitations that we put on ourselves through this legislation will be kind of the guideposts for how it is that we appropriate dollars. So yeah.
Speaking of limitations, one of the ideas you brought forward during this debate process was you had a bipartisan bill to cut off the paychecks, or at least hold them off to the side until this got finished. Now, it is finished, and that bill's not going to move. What kind of reaction did you get from your colleagues when you and, it was Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, I believe, that you worked on this with?
That's right.
What were they saying to you about this?
So I had quite a few colleagues tell me that they hated this bill and continue to hate it. It's a piece of legislation that Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, and I introduced that says in the case of a default, which of course the United States has never defaulted, or a government shutdown, which, as your viewers know, has happened far too frequently, members of Congress won't get paid. It's straightforward. If we're not doing our jobs of literally keeping the government open and moving, we shouldn't get paid. But the reactions on Capitol Hill were not particularly ones of great pleasure. I had many colleagues tell me they thought it was a terrible idea. It would be such a negative impact. And, somewhat without any empathy at all, I said, well, you know what? There's really a great way to solve this solution. If you think you can't do it without your paycheck, don't default. Or don't ever shut down the government, because certainly the people I represent have a hard time without their paycheck, and Congress should feel the same sort of pressure when we're the actual ones who have the ability to keep things moving and do our job.
I know one of the other things you've been working on is regards to stock trading by members of Congress. What are your concerns on that? And do we need to do a better job of making sure that lawmakers are not using their positions to gain an advantage in the market?
Well, here's the challenge. We have really good disclosure laws, and so it's very clear when members of Congress are buying and selling stocks. But the reality is that that's enough to, in fact, make the American people say, wait a second, why are you meeting with these folks, or why are you voting on this, and now you're also buying or selling this stock? And we saw and continue to see far too many examples where it just doesn't pass the smell test. And so I think it's very clear that members of Congress should not be able to buy or sell individual stocks. You can invest in a retirement 401k, put away money for the future. But buying and selling individual stocks, when we're taking votes that move markets, when we're meeting with CEOs, when we're having hearings that, might put pressure on particular companies or industries, it's inappropriate. And this is a piece of legislation. It is also bipartisan. I work on this one with Chip Roy from Texas, who got a little bit of notoriety these past couple of days because on the debt ceiling discussions, of course, he and I disagree completely on that topic. But We've got more than 50 members of Congress who support this effort. We continue to push it forward. We're looking to get a hearing and then ultimately a vote on the floor. It's a straightforward reform and a way that we can make sure that the American people know that we're taking actions to be deserving of their trust.
Congresswoman, you may have heard as we were getting ready to begin this interview, we had some sound from Virginia Senator Tim Kaine commenting on Governor Glenn Youngkin having made this decision to send 100 Virginia National Guard troops to the southern Texas border. You're somebody with a national security background. The senator says he has deep concerns about this. Do you share those concerns as well?
I have significant concerns, and I'll tell you why. The men and women of the Virginia National Guard do incredible things. They have recently deployed to Africa for long deployments, Eastern Europe. Of course, they deployed to Capitol Hill after the insurrection to keep the country safe, the Capitol safe, and the inauguration safe. Some have previously, under federal orders, deployed to the southern border in support of Title X priorities. But for the governor to send members of the Guard to the border at a request from another governor, there are many, many questions about what this would mean for the members of the Guard, the kind of protection surrounding them if they're not on federal orders, and frankly, for their readiness. They do have upcoming deployments in the future. What happens to their training? And they have jobs in the civilian world. What this means to take them once again away from their jobs, away from training, and ultimately in advance of potential deployments upcoming. And notably, if the governor is very focused on issues related to security, as am I, I've passed border security legislation under former President Trump and now current President Biden. I would urge him to spend some of his attention speaking with his fellow Republicans and fellow Republican governors, because Congress has the power to move forward with bipartisan immigration reform and bipartisan border security legislation. That's what needs to be done here. So I would hope that if he wants to engage in this conversation, he'll do it more productively than it seems he's positioned to do so at the moment.
All right, Virginia Democratic Congresswoman, let's get that right. Abigail Spanberger, thank you for joining us live this Sunday morning on the Hill. Always a pleasure.